Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns, and today we're talking about this. Specifically, that is catching the sword out of the air and delivering a cut or a thrust simultaneously. So this is one of those, I guess you could call it movie-like moves that I think a lot of people think about and want to be able to do, but can't pull off most of the time. And what I would say is that 90% of the time, this is patently impossible. And one of the reasons it's possible here is because of the weapons being used, that being Messer. So what a lot of people see when they look at the texts and the treatises for Messer is that there's a lot of grappling in it. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily know why that is or why it is that Messer lends itself so much to grappling. And the reason for that is that not just it is a shorter weapon, but it's a shorter weapon with no real hand protection. If you go further along in time to saber or even small sword or whatever, you'll see that the amount of hand protection that you have over your hand determines a lot of how the weapon is used, because the hand is inevitably the most common and most useful target for a weapon. The other thing that influences it a lot is reach. So Messer, being a short weapon with very little hand protection, means that everything is generally a target because of just how close you have to be to another person just to engage with them. And what that also means is that doing something like reaching out your hand to try to grab for someone else's sword becomes a lot more viable because there's not as much dangerous weapon to have to be avoiding. So if we break down this exchange a little bit more, there's also a little bit of setup that goes into why this was successful. And the first piece of setup just is that first exchange. The person on the right is throwing cuts rapidly towards the head of their opponent. And this is a very common thing for you to do in Messer, specifically because the head and the hand, especially given how both of these people are standing, are pretty much equal distant targets. You'll see both of them will start off with their hands basically against their chest or only a very short distance in front of them, and that's specifically to try to make up for the fact that Messer has no hand protection. So they need to keep their hands back as far as possible so that you don't just get hit in the hand every single time you step forward. So again, you throw in those cuts rapidly to the head. And then right here, we see something very important happen. What we see is a feint. So just like the last exchange, which was sort of set up, person on the right throws a fake right cut that they pull short right as they are going to then basically flip it around and throw what was basically a Scheitelhau, a plunging cut, a Krumpau, whatever you want to call it. But what's important here is the feint. See, the thing is that if this was just a cut thrown straight at the opponent's head, this attempt to grab the hand out of the air probably would not have worked. And that's because if you throw a cut, basically intending for your long edge and the majority of your blade to just hit someone in the head, putting your hand here is not actually going to protect you from a planed blade that's coming right down here. Basically, all that's going to happen is you're going to get hit on the hand with the strong of the blade, while your head also probably gets hit with the weak of the blade, the part that most people want to cut with. So the reason this is successful is because this feint happens. And because this feint happens, there is this opportunity to grab the sword or grab the sword arm as it's moving around. And again, the reason you're able to grab the sword arm here is because look at how close you have to be in order to just throw a cut. So just to be clear, it's not necessarily a mistake to throw a feint with a Messer. In fact, that can be extremely effective given that the weapon is so fast and so close. Feinting somewhere and going somewhere else in a lot of ways can guarantee you a hit. But in this case, it didn't quite work because the universal kind of defensive maneuver of shoving up that left hand and using it as defense while you can do whatever you want with your main weapon can be very effective for this reason. And this is why you see so much grappling in Messer treatises. Once you get to a certain point where everyone kind of accepts some of the givens of the weapon and your opponent isn't just trying to hit you and you aren't just able to hand snipe them over and over again, you shorten drastically the distance between two people who are fighting with that weapon. So again, if we think about like rapier or saber, you want your arm out as far as possible because you have that hand protection keeping your hand safe. all of this is the kind of higher level messer fighting that you don't see a lot, even in tournaments, because most people don't have that kind of familiarity with the weapon and with the sources to know that you have to keep your hand really, really far back. Otherwise, you're going to get hand sniped because there's just no way around it. The messer's hand protection is non-existent. Then the other thing you learn once you start pulling your hand back is that, well, now you have to go for these deep targets, because if you're trying to hand snipe all the time, you're not going to commit far enough forward, and the other person's going to hit you far better, with a deep target, a cut or a thrust. So then once you get to this point where everyone's throwing their shots more or less at these deep targets, and they're trying to very much get closer so that they can really pick whatever target they want and get around what defense is attributed to pulling your hands back, this is where the hand grab suddenly comes into play, and all of the wrestling that you see in the sources becomes that much more viable. So, breaking it down one last little bit, you grab the hand and you push it up and out of the way as far as you can while returning, again, whatever you want with this other hand. And the reason that you want to grab the hand and push up is, again, because of the shortness of the weapon. One thing that I think movies will maybe make you think is possible but is not possible is that you're generally not going to be able to fully stop the momentum of that moving arm with just your hand. If you think about it, whenever you throw a cut, you're not just throwing a cut with your arm or with your sword, you're also throwing it with your hips and your lats and your back and everything. So yes, you can meaningfully stop that cut by going up to the wrist and stopping the momentum of the sword, but you're not going to stop all of it. And there's a good chance that right as you're coming forward and you try to stop that, your arm structure is going to collapse a little bit. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're giving your arm that kind of spring buffer zone to collapse a little bit while still being safe. So when you're reaching out for the weapon and you want to stop it, you don't want to fully extend and lock out your elbow, or else you're not really going to stop it very effectively. It's probably just going to wiggle around in your hand or lose your grip, or more importantly, it's going to break the structure of your arm anyway, and if you're not ready for it, you're just going to get hit on the head. So in this case, because of the kind of Zwerkow Krumpow motion that was coming as the afterblow, pushing the hand up, despite the fact that it couldn't fully stop the rotation of the sword, it took a lot of the power out of it. And it also meant that when you push the hand up, there's only so far down you can tilt your wrist in order to perform this particular move. So it went clean like over the head. And as you see, helicoptered all the way around past, which is how you know it didn't really hit anything. With more of an Oberhau or just a 45-degree angle cut, this situation gets a little bit more tenuous, where basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you catch that hand, you want it to go over the top of the same shoulder that you extended your arm with. So again, in this case, you extend the left arm, you grab their right hand, and then you want to let it collapse a little bit over your shoulder as you move in. That inward motion, again, preventing the blade from meaningfully be able to get to the target that it wants to get to. Because if you already have the hand and you can ensure that the hand's not going to really go any further forward or backwards because you've grabbed it, you know that the place that you're going to be safe is just past the level of the wrist. That's your safety zone, because once you're past the wrist, there's nothing this blade can do, no matter how you kind of flail it around with your wrist, to get a meaningful cut out of it. Even if you flipped it completely upside down and tried to, short edge cut backwards or inwards onto the other person's back, there's a good chance that that cut wouldn't be very good. And it most certainly probably wasn't the cut you were going for when you started this whole thing. So if we back it up and watch it one more time and you watch all the elements come together, especially again, considering the setup here, what you have is a perfect ideal situation where you're using your own person's forward momentum and the shortness of the weapon against them to put them in a situation where you get inside the pocket, so to speak, get into that safe zone between the arm and the blade, and deliver a strike yourself while preventing any to hit you by grabbing their sword arm out of the air. All right, that's going to be it for today. If you'd like to see your own footage featured on the channel, feel free to send me an email over at HEMAFightBreakdowns@gmail.com, and I hope to see you next time.